Chapter 59. Fasten Your Seatbelts. I was in the bar with Newt and H. Lowe Crosby and a couple of strangers when San Lorenzo was sighted. Crosby was talking about pissants. You know what I mean by a pissant? I know the term, I said, but it obviously doesn't have the ding-a-ling associations for me that it has for you. Crosby was in his cups and had the drunkard's illusion that he could speak frankly, provided he spoke affectionately. He spoke frankly and affectionately of Newt's size, something nobody else in the bar had so far commented on. I don't mean a little feller like this. Crosby hung a ham hand on Newt's shoulder. It isn't the size that makes a man a pissant, it's the way he thinks. I've seen men 4 times as big as this little feller here, and they were pissants. And I've seen little fellers, well, not this little actually, but pretty damn little, by God, and I'd call them real men. Thanks, said Newt pleasantly, not even glancing at the monstrous hand on his shoulder. Never have I seen a human being better adjusted to such a humiliating physical handicap. I shuddered with admiration. You were talking about pissants, I said to Crosby, hoping to get the weight of his hand off Newt. Damn right I was. Crosby straightened up. You haven't told us what a pissant is yet, I said. A pissant is somebody who thinks he's so damn smart he never can keep his mouth shut. No matter what anybody says, he's got to argue with it. You say you like something, and by God, he'll tell you why you're wrong to like it. A pissant does his best to make you feel like a boob all the time. No matter what you say, he knows better. Not a very attractive characteristic, I suggested. My daughter wanted to marry a pissant once, said Crosby darkly. Did she? I squashed him like a bug. Crosby hammered on the bar, remembering things the pissant had said and done. Jesus, he said, we've all been to college. His gaze lit on Newt again. You go to college? Cornell, said Newt. Cornell, cried Crosby gladly. My God, I went to Cornell. So did he. Newt nodded at me. 3 Cornellians, all in the same plane, said Crosby, and we had another Grand Falloon festival on our hands. When it subsided some, Crosby asked Newt what he did. I paint. Houses? Pictures. I'll be damned, said Crosby. Return to your seats and fasten your belts, please, warned the airline hostess. We're over Manzano Airport, Bolivar, San Lorenzo. Christ, now wait just a goddamn minute here, said Crosby, looking down at Newt. All of a sudden, I realize you've got a name I've heard before. My father was the father of the atom bomb. Newt didn't say Felix Honecker was one of the fathers. He said Felix was the father. Is that so? Asked Crosby. That's so. I was thinking about something else, said Crosby. He had to think hard. Something about a dancer. I think we'd better get back to our seats, said Newt, tightening some. Something about a Russian dancer. Crosby was sufficiently addled by booze to see no harm in thinking out loud. I remember an editorial about how maybe the dancer was a spy. Please, gentlemen, said the stewardess, you really must get back to your seats and fasten your belts. Newt looked up at H. Lowe Crosby innocently. You sure the name was Honecker? And, in order to eliminate any chance of mistaken identity, he spelled the name for Crosby. I could be wrong, said H. Lowe Crosby. Chapter 60. An Underprivileged Nation. The island, seen from the air, was an amazingly regular rectangle. Cruel and useless stone needles were thrust up from the sea. They sketched a circle around it. At the south end of the island was the port city of Bolivar. It was the only city. It was the capital. It was built on a marshy table. The runways of Monzano Airport were on its waterfront. Mountains arose abruptly to the north of Bolivar, crowding the remainder of the island with their brutal humps. They were called the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, but they looked like pigs at a trough to me. Bolivar had had many names: Cosma, Santa Maria, St. Louis, St. George, and Port Glory among them. It was given its present name by Johnson and McCabe in 1922, was named in honor of Simón Bolívar, the great Latin American idealist and hero. When Johnson and McCabe came upon the city, it was built of twigs, tin, crates, and mud, rested on the catacombs of a trillion happy scavengers, catacombs in a sour mash of slop, feculence, and slime. That was pretty much the way I found it too, except for the new architectural false face along the waterfront. Johnson and McCabe had failed to raise the people from misery and muck. Papa Monzano had failed too. Everybody was bound to fail, for San Lorenzo was as unproductive as an equal area in the Sahara or the polar ice cap. At the same time, it had as dense a population as could be found anywhere, India and China not excluded. There were 450 inhabitants for each uninhabitable square mile. During the idealistic phase of McCabe's and Johnson's reorganization of San Lorenzo, it was announced that the country's total income would be divided among all adult persons in equal shares, wrote Philip Castle. The first and only time this was tried, each share came to between $6 and $7. Chapter 61. What a Corporal Was Worth. In the customs shed at Monzano Airport, we were all required to submit to a luggage inspection and to convert what money we intended to spend in San Lorenzo into the local currency, into corporals, which Papa Monzano insisted were worth 50 American cents. The shed was neat and new, but plenty of signs had already been slapped on the walls, higgledy-piggledy. Anybody caught practicing Bocanon-ism in San Lorenzo, said one, will die on the hook. Another poster featured a picture of Bocanon, a scrawny old colored man who was smoking a cigar. He looked clever and kind and amused. Under the picture were the words, "Wanted dead or alive, 10,000 corporals reward." I took a closer look at that poster and found reproduced at the bottom of it some sort of police identification form Bocanon had had to fill out way back in 1929. It was reproduced, apparently, to show Bocanon hunters what his fingerprints and handwriting were like. But what interested me were some of the words Bocanon had chosen to put into the blanks in 1929. Wherever possible, he had taken the cosmic view, had taken into consideration, for instance, such things as the shortness of life and the longness of eternity. He reported his avocation as being alive. He reported his principal occupation as being dead. This is a Christian nation. All footplay will be punished by the hook, said another sign. The sign was meaningless to me, since I had not yet learned that Bocanones mingled their souls by pressing the bottoms of their feet together. And the greatest mystery of all, since I had not read all of Philip Castle's book, was how Bocanon, bosom friend of Corporal McCabe, had come to be an outlaw. Chapter 62. Why Hazel Wasn't Scared. There were 7 of us who got off at San Lorenzo: Newt and Angela, Ambassador Minton and his wife, H. Lowe Crosby and his wife, and I. When we had cleared customs, we were herded outdoors and onto a reviewing stand. There, we faced a very quiet crowd. 5,000 or more San Lorenzans stared at us. The islanders were oatmeal colored. The people were thin. There wasn't a fat person to be seen. Every person had teeth missing. Many legs were bowed or swollen. Not one pair of eyes was clear. The women's breasts were bare and paltry. The men wore loose loincloths that did little to conceal peens like pendulums on grandfather clocks. There were many dogs, but not one barked. There were many infants, but not one cried. Here and there someone coughed, and that was all. A military band stood at attention before the crowd. It did not play. There was a color guard before the band. It carried two banners, the Stars and Stripes and the flag of San Lorenzo. The flag of San Lorenzo consisted of a Marine corporal's chevrons on a royal blue field. The banners hung lank in the windless day. I imagine that somewhere far away I heard the blamming of a sledge on a brazen drum. There was no such sound. My soul was simply resonating the beat of the brassy, clanging heat of the San Lorenzen climb. "I'm sure glad it's a Christian country," Hazel Crosby whispered to her husband, "or I'd be a little scared." Behind us was the xylophone. There was a glittering sign on the xylophone. The sign was made of garnets and rhinestones. The sign said, "Mona." Chapter 63. Reverent and Free. To the left side of our reviewing stand were 6 propeller-driven fighter planes in a row, military assistance from the United States to San Lorenzo. On the fuselage of each plane was painted, with childish bloodlust, a boa constrictor which was crushing a devil to death. Blood came from the devil's ears, nose, and mouth. A pitchfork was slipping from satanic red fingers. Before each plane stood an oatmeal-colored pilot, silent too. Then, above that too mid-silence, there came a nagging song like the song of a gnat. It was a siren approaching. The siren was on Papa's glossy black Cadillac limousine. The limousine came to a stop before us, tires smoking. Out climbed Papa Monzano, his adopted daughter, Mona A. Mons Monzano, and Franklin Honecker. At a limp, imperious signal from Papa, the crowd sang the San Lorenzen national anthem. Its melody was Home on the Range. The words had been written in 1922 by Lionel Boyd Johnson by Bokanon. The words were these: "Oh, ours is a land where the living is grand, and the men are as fearless as sharks. The women are pure, and we are always sure that our children will all toe their marks. San Lorenzo, what a rich, lucky island are we! Our enemies quail, for they know they will fail against people so reverent and free." Chapter 64. Peace and Plenty. And then the crowd was deathly still again. Papa and Mona and Frank joined us on the reviewing stand. One snare drum played as they did so. The drumming stopped when Papa pointed a finger at the drummer. He wore a shoulder holster on the outside of his blouse. The weapon in it was a chromium-plated .45. He was an old man, as so many members of my chorus were. He was in poor shape. His steps were small and bounceless. He was still a fat man, but his lard was melting fast, for his simple uniform was loose. The balls of his hop-toed eyes were yellow. His hands trembled. His personal bodyguard was Major General Franklin Honecker, whose uniform was white. Frank, thin-wristed, narrow-shouldered, looked like a child kept up long after his customary bedtime. On his breast was a medal. I observed the two, Papa and Frank, with some difficulty, not because my view was blocked, but because I could not take my eyes off Mona. I was thrilled, heartbroken, hilarious, insane. Every greedy, unreasonable dream I'd ever had about what a woman should be came true in Mona. There, God love her warm and creamy soul, was peace and plenty forever. That girl, and she was only 18, was rapturously serene. She seemed to understand all, and to be all there was to understand. In the books of Bokanon, she is mentioned by name. One thing Bokanon says of her is this: Mona has the simplicity of the all. Her dress was white and Greek. She wore flat sandals on her small brown feet. Her pale gold hair was lank and long. Her hips were a lyre. O God, peace and plenty forever. She was the one beautiful girl in San Lorenzo. She was the national treasure. Papa had adopted her, according to Philip Castle, in order to mingle divinity with the harshness of his rule. The xylophone was rolled to the front of the stand, and Mona played it. She played When Day Is Done. It was all tremolo, swelling, fading, swelling again. The crowd was intoxicated by beauty, and then it was time for Papa to greet us. Chapter 65. A Good Time to Come to San Lorenzo. Papa was a self-educated man who had been major domo to Corporal McCabe. He had never been off the island. He spoke American English passably well. Everything that any one of us said on the reviewing stand was bellowed out at the crowd through doomsday horns. Whatever went out through those horns gabbled down a wide, short boulevard at the back of the crowd, ricocheted off the three glass-faced new buildings at the end of the boulevard, and came cackling back. "Welcome," said Papa. "You are coming to the best friend America ever had. America is misunderstood in many places, but not here, Mr. Ambassador." He bowed to H. Lowe Crosby, the bicycle manufacturer, mistaking him for the new ambassador. "I know you've got a good country here, Mr. President," said Crosby. "Everything I ever heard about it sounds great to me. There's just one thing." "Oh?" "I'm not the ambassador," said Crosby. "I wish I was, but I'm just a plain, ordinary businessman." It hurt him to say who the real ambassador was. "This man over here is the big cheese." "Ah," Papa smiled at his mistake. The smile went away suddenly. Some pain inside of him made him wince, then made him hunch over, close his eyes, made him concentrate on surviving the pain. Frank Honecker went to his support, feebly, incompetently. "Are you all right?" "Excuse me," Papa whispered at last, straightening up some. There were tears in his eyes. He brushed them away, straightening up all the way. "I beg your pardon." He seemed to be in doubt for a moment as to where he was, as to what was expected of him, and then he remembered. He shook Horlick Minton's hand. "Here, you are among friends." "I'm sure of it," said Minton gently. "Christian," said Papa. "Good." "Anti-communist," said Papa. "Good." "No communists here," said Papa. "They fear the hook too much." "I should think they would," said Minton. "You have picked a very good time to come to us," said Papa. Tomorrow will be one of the happiest days in the history of our country. Tomorrow is our greatest national holiday, the day of the 100 Martyrs to Democracy. It will also be the day of the engagement of Major General Honecker to Mona A. Mons Monzano, to the most precious person in my life and in the life of San Lorenzo. I wish you much happiness, Miss Monzano, said Minton warmly, and I congratulate you, General Honecker. The two young people nodded their thanks. Minton now spoke of the so-called 100 Martyrs to Democracy, and he told a whooping lie. There is not an American schoolchild who does not know the story of San Lorenzo's noble sacrifice in World War II. The 100 brave San Lorenzans, whose day tomorrow is, gave as much as freedom-loving men can. The President of the United States has asked me to be his personal representative at ceremonies tomorrow, to cast a wreath, the gift of the American people to the people of San Lorenzo, on the sea. The people of San Lorenzo thank you, and your President, and the generous people of the United States of America for their thoughtfulness, said Papa. We would be honored if you would cast the wreath into the sea during the engagement party tomorrow. The honor is mine. Papa commanded us all to honor him with our presence at the wreath ceremony and engagement party next day. We were to appear at his palace at noon. What children these two will have, Papa said, inviting us to stare at Frank and Mona. What blood, what beauty. The pain hit him again. He again closed his eyes to huddle himself around that pain. He waited for it to pass, but it did not pass. Still in agony, he turned away from us, faced the crowd and the microphone. He tried to gesture at the crowd, failed. He tried to say something to the crowd, failed. And then the words came out. Go home, he cried, strangling. Go home. The crowd scattered like leaves. Papa faced us again, still grotesque in pain. And then he collapsed.